The second pillar is one which I think in some respects is possibly the most important one. But then again, I change my opinion every day. So tomorrow it will be a different thing. But at this moment in time, I think that this is possibly one of the most important ones. Again, you see I'm saying one of the most important ones. The second pillar follows on from the first pillar, and it concerns the human ego, or more precisely, the human I. Now, I don't like to use the term ego because of Freudian connotations. We have a psychologist here, is that right?
Yeah.
In the back, okay. So you're going to be on my case if I start talking about ego. Yeah. So in order not to be Freudian or not to conflate it with the Freudian understanding of ego, which is different, the word in Arabic is ana, I, or ene in Turkish, or benlik, egoism, I-ness, and I usually translate it as the human I. And I gave a talk actually about the human I quite recently, and at the end of the session someone came up to me and said, "What do our eyes have to do with this?" They completely misunderstood. Yeah, I mean, I'd been talking for 30 minutes on the human eye, and this poor guy had been sitting there thinking, well, you know, I've come here for a lecture on ophthalmology, and you know, you're talking about the ego. So let's be quite clear, we're talking about the I. The human I, that mix of qualities and characteristics in each of us which constitutes our sense of self. And again, since we've got a psychologist in the house, I have to be very careful of the terminology I use. So all of those things in us which give us our sense of self. Now, Nursi's exposition of the nature of the self provides us with a kind of spiritual psychology which clarifies the true nature of the relationship between man and God, while at the same time undermining the foundations upon which modern anthropocentric psychology are built. What do I mean by anthropocentric psychology? What do I mean by anthropocentric psychology, sister?
Based on the self.
Psychology which is based on human beings being at the center of the universe. Psychology, as with most of the sciences in post-Enlightenment world, secularism is the default setting. Human beings are at the center of creation. Nursi's understanding of the relationship between man and God subverts this whole tradition and puts God back at the center. So, according to Sayyid Nursi, every soul, every I, possesses the ability to appreciate, receive, and to reflect consciously the names of God. Why? Because every soul, every I, finds within itself traces of the attributes of perfection. So every I possesses the ability to appreciate, receive, and reflect the names of God, because inside of every one of us there are traces of the divine names. Reflections of the divine names. But if we cut the connection between man and God, what happens? Those traces of perfection that we find in ourselves, we keep for ourselves. If there's no connection between man and God, the attributes of perfection that we find in ourselves, we appropriate them for ourselves.
Or misappropriate.
We misappropriate them, absolutely. So, if we cut the connection, man appropriates for himself the attributes of perfection and mistakenly believes that he is the owner of all that he has and of all that he is. So this is a very, very clear demarcation. You cut the connection, I am the wise one, I am the one who knows. I am the one who does this or that. I own myself. I can do whatever I want with my body because it is mine. So it's all about ownership. Ownership of the attributes of perfection. And if you think about it, whoever owns the attributes of perfection can do with those attributes whatever he wants.
Right.
Which is why we do not question God, because he is the owner of the attributes of perfection. But when there is no connection, I am the owner of myself.
Gotcha.
So, someone who cuts the connection, rather than giving back or surrendering these attributes by reflecting them consciously, he keeps them for himself and he attempts to perfect them, not by being a conscious mirror, but by acting himself as though he were worthy of worship. This is very subtle. Let's not miss this point. If we do not act as conscious mirrors to God, reflecting God's names, we appropriate those names for ourselves, as though we are worthy of worship.
Right.
God says, I was a hidden treasure. If we do not accept that God is the hidden treasure, we become the hidden treasure. And we act as though we are the hidden treasure. Just look at Hollywood actresses and actors for proof of this. It's the only example that comes to mind at the moment. There are thousands of examples.
What, in the Quran would it be Pharaoh?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Who would be the ultimate, or one of the examples?
The Pharaoh, Namrud, yes, Namrud, Shaddad, yeah, all of these. So, the ability of every human being to talk about himself or herself as I was given to human beings as part of the trust. And this is the trust here on the slide. You know the verse in the Quran which talks about amana, the trust. We did indeed offer the trust to the heavens and the earth and the mountains, but they refused to undertake it, being afraid thereof. But man undertook it. He was indeed unjust and foolish. Zalum Jahul. This is the ability to say I. For Sayyid Nursi, the amana is the ability that we all have to say I. So, giving us the trust, you know, Allah said to us, do you want to be I? And we said yes. Even though we knew that Allah was Rabb. Alastu bi rabbikum. Am I not your Lord? And we said yes. But at the same time, we accepted the trust. Now, when a trust is given to someone, he has full power of disposal over it. For example, if I say to my very dear friend Hakan, here's my watch, Rolex, £4,000. Joke. Please look after it. I've entrusted my watch to him. He has full power of disposal over it. But he's expected to use it in a way which I prescribe. For example, when I say, please put it in the cupboard, don't leave it exposed to sunlight, don't put it near any magnetic objects, don't let any children play with it, put it in a high box, in a high cupboard, don't let anyone touch it, and so on. But he can go against me if he wants. He can go against me if he wants. So this is the trust that was given to human beings. For Nursi, this trust is man's God-given ability to act as Khalifatullah. God gave us the ability to act as His Khalifa, God's representative on earth. And I think we all know the narrative in the Quran where God creates human beings, and if we read through there, behold, your Lord said to the angels, I will create a vicegerent on earth. They said, will you place therein one who will make mischief therein and shed blood, whilst we do celebrate your praises and glorify your holy name? He said, I know what you do not know. And he taught Adam the names of all things. Then he placed them before the angels and said, tell me the names of these if you are right. They said, glory to you of knowledge we have known apart from what you have taught us. In truth, it is you who are perfect in knowledge and wisdom. He said, Adam, tell them their names. When he told them, God said, did I not tell you that I know the secrets of heaven and earth? And I know what you reveal and what you conceal. And behold, we said to the angels, bow down to Adam. For Nursi, this creation narrative is all about the trust. It's all about God creating a new creation who will have the role of Khalifatullah. In other words, the ability to reflect consciously all of the divine names. This is why even the angels are told to bow down in front of Adam, in front of human beings. Now, the key which unlocks the meaning of this passage lies in the names which God taught to Adam.
Right.
What does it mean for Allah to teach Adam the names? Does it mean that Allah went around the creation saying, right, this is a tree, this is a river, this is a mountain? Maybe there is a sense in which Adam, as the representative of the first human being, was taught about the physical world. But the names, for Nursi, these names are the attributes of perfection. So Allah taught Adam compassion, mercy, wisdom, knowledge, all of the names, all of the attributes of perfection. And of course, Adam alayhi salam is the first, as the first man, represents the totality of human beings. When we're talking about Adam in this narrative, not only are we talking about one human individual, we're talking about the whole of the human race.
Right.
We are all Adam. And the word for human being, the word for person in Farsi, I think in Turkish as well, is Adam.
Yes.
Adam.
So was that Adam?
Yes.
Adam.
Adam.
Adam. Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
For Nursi, the names taught by God to man are the Asmaul Husna, the most beautiful names of God Himself. So, what's God's objective in giving man the knowledge of the names? Well, in giving man the knowledge of the names, not only does God teach man to recognize all of the divine attributes, He also gives him the ability to display these attributes consciously. So, when God teaches Adam the names, He gives him the ability to recognize attributes of perfection. We all recognize compassion. We all recognize knowledge. We all recognize harmony. We all recognize beauty. But God also gave Adam the ability to manifest those names consciously, to display them, to be a conscious mirror, and to act as divine representative on earth. In other words, the trust, the amana, is the ability that man has to recognize attributes of perfection such as power, wisdom, mercy, and so on, simply by virtue of the fact that he's created in God's image, as we said in the previous session.
So was trust a precursor or Afterwards.
Precursor of?
No, I'm just trying to follow the order. So we created Adam.
Order is not important, I don't think.
Right.
Because again, the Quran doesn't come in neat packages ordered and, you know, linear beginning, middle, end. If we understand the amana, the trust, as being this ability to understand names of attributes of perfection and to display them. And of course, it's because of human beings' potential to act as God's representative that the angels were asked to acknowledge this special creational status by bowing down. The angels were asked to make sujood to Adam because of this. Now we know in the cosmology of the Quran, the angels only have a limited knowledge of God's names. They only know as much as God allows them to know. And while they worship God with perfect sincerity and awareness, they only do so because they do not have the will to disobey. They cannot disobey God. Angels cannot disobey. And they are aware of God, but they are not aware that they are aware. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
In a sense that a baby is aware of its mother, but is not aware that it's aware. You only become aware of your mother when you are, in a conceptual sense, separated. In a time sense, when you're 3, 4, 5, we become individual and independent human beings. That's when we make this fall. You know, the fall of Adam happens in every human life.
Right.
So the angels were told to bow down to Adam because Adam was superior in that sense. So human beings, on the other hand, are endowed not only with knowledge of all of God's names, but with free will. This is the important point to note here. The difference between angels and human beings. We all recognize God's names. Angels have a limited sphere of recognition. Human beings can recognize all of the names and can reflect all of the names without exception. But we have free will, and that's what sets us apart. If we use our knowledge of the names wisely, and if we bow down to God of our own volition, then we go above the angels. We rise above the angels. And we fulfill our destiny as the jewel in the crown of creation. But if we abuse our knowledge of the names, we fail to fulfill our part of the trust. And then we sink to asfal safilin, the lowest of the low. We are ashraful makhluqat, we are the most precious creation.
Most honorable.
Most honored and most honorable. But we also have the ability to become the most despised. And this all has to do with how we treat the names, how we engage with the names and attributes. So the trust, the amana, offers whoever accepts it the ability to know God and to experience God through these beautiful names and through these attributes of perfection. But, and it's a big but, whoever accepts a trust must also undertake the responsibility to use what he's been given in accordance with the wishes of the giver. So, in the example of the watch, if I give my watch to Hakan, I entrust it to him. He must obey my instructions. Don't expose it to sunlight, put it in the, in a high drawer, keep it away from children, etc., etc. Whoever accepts a trust must undertake the responsibility to use what he's been given in accordance with the wishes of the giver. If he discharges his responsibility successfully, he will reap the reward. Maybe when I come back from my trip, I give him like £2 or something, £10, or I buy him a present. Yeah?
What about giving up of your watch and giving it to him?
Oh, that's a step too far. Yeah, I understand where you're going with that. If he fails, he must face the consequences. He's going to have to pay me, you know, if he smashes my watch or if he lets a child throw it down the toilet or something, you know, he's going to have to buy me a new watch. And I will never trust him again. But Hakan would never do that. So in the context of the trust which is offered by God, the responsibility is great. Because what does it mean in practice? In practice it means assuming the attributes of God and acting not only in His name, but in complete accordance with His will. So when we accept the amana, we accept to act in His name. When we're told, you know, say Bismillah, that doesn't just mean when you sit and you have your food, you say Bismillah and start eating. To act in the name of God means being a conscious mirror. That is our part of the deal. To act as a conscious mirror. It's only when man grasps the significance of the trust and what it means in practice to accept this undertaking, only when we understand this, then we will know why the heavens and the earth and the mountains said, no thanks. We don't want this responsibility. Because and now, why heavens and earth and mountains? Mountain is a kind of symbol of hardness and stability and durability. And the heavens, the expansiveness of the heavens, they refused the trust. Because the responsibility was huge. We accepted it. Why? Because we're stupid, basically. Allah's saying, we are zalum and jahul. So, the I, the ana, is considered by Nursi to be part of the trust that was given to man by God. And the I, Nursi goes on to say, is not only the means through which we're able to understand God's names, but he says the ana is also the key which unlocks the riddle of creation, the puzzle of creation, or the talisman of creation. Nursi says the doors of creation are locked, and ana is the key to opening them. So, in other words, if you understand ana correctly, you understand creation correctly. He says, when we understand the meaning of I, the locked doors of creation will open, and the riddle of cosmic existence will be made clear. Now, the ability of the I, or the self, can we call it the I, the self? I don't think we can now.
No.
You know, going back to self and I think they're different.
Yeah.
Which is why the question of the brother about nafs.
Yes.
Nafs and I are slightly different, but they're components of, they're part of the same package. The ability of the I to know God comes from the fact that the I contains what Nursi calls indications or samples. Like when you walk through a supermarket and they give you a little bit of cheese to taste, they're trying to sell the cheese, new cheese, and they give you a tiny, tiny little bit to taste. I always say, well, how can I tell that the cheese is good with that much? Please give me some more. So, Nursi says the I contains samples which reflect the attributes and functions of God. And he says, in this sense, the I is like a unit of measurement. This is really important. The I is like a unit of measurement, which exists solely for the sake of revealing the existence and meaning of something else. The eye is a unit of measurement which is there to enable us to understand something else. This is where it gets really interesting. He says, like any other unit of measurement, the eye does not have a concrete material existence. Let's see what he says exactly. Notice he says, it is not necessary for a unit of measurement to have actual existence. Rather, like hypothetical lines in geometry, a unit of measurement may be formed by hypothesis and supposition. It is not necessary for its actual existence to be established by concrete knowledge and proofs. Now, what does this mean in practice? Imagine I go into a shop and I say to the shopkeeper, into a greengrocer's, I say, good morning, can I have 4 kilos, please? The greengrocer will say,
What?
kilos of what? So 4 kilos. The kilo doesn't exist. A kilo has no external concrete existence. It's a unit of measurement only. It only makes sense when I say kilo of apples, kilo of tomatoes. So unit of measurement doesn't need to have an existence. It doesn't need to have a concrete existence, a material existence. Notice he says the eye is the same. The eye does not have a concrete material existence. Now, whether the eye is part of the soul or part of the spirit, whether it's a function of the conscience, whether it's part of the psyche, notice he never says. He doesn't say, so Volkan, your question, it's impossible to answer. Is eye part of nafs? The same as nafs? We can't say. And Nursi never says. But what is clear, however, is that the eye is an abstract entity whose sole function it is to act as a kind of unit of measurement against which God's names can be measured. So just like the greengrocer's shop where I go and I say, can I have 4 kilos? And they say, 4 kilos of what? The eye is a unit of measurement used to measure God's names.
Right.
Now, what does this mean? Such a unit of measurement is necessary because it would seem when we deal with God, we're dealing with a being who is absolute and all-encompassing. Now, what does that mean to say that God is absolute and all-encompassing? The very fact that something is absolute and all-encompassing, without any shape or form, means that under normal circumstances it cannot be perceived. We can't see it or touch it, or smell it or feel it. A better example, what would it be like if everything was red? Everything in the world was red. Everything, without exception. Would we actually know what red is?
No. No.
We wouldn't know. If everything were red, red would be meaningless.
Yeah.
There would be nothing against which red might be compared. If everything were red, we wouldn't be able to perceive it. Notice he gives us another example. He talks about light. He says, and I quote, for example, an endless light without darkness may not be known or perceived. But if a line of real or imaginary darkness is drawn, the light then becomes known. Going back to our colour red, if the whole of the cosmos were red, red would not be known. But if you put a little blue dot, then suddenly,
What does it come?
yes, because we can compare. The little blue dot allows red to become known. So Nursi uses light as an example. He says an endless light without darkness, you would not understand what light is. You only understand light when there is darkness. And of course light is only discernible because it exists in degrees. Without the existence of darkness, light would remain imperceptible. So we need darkness in order to understand light. So sometimes I say, all this talk about we need light, we need light, we need light. No, we need darkness as well. Because without dark, we need kufr. Without kufr, there's no iman. Everything we need its opposites. That sounds really bad, we need kufr. But you know what I mean, I think.
Yeah.
And we need shaitan.
And we need shaitan, we need Fir'aun. Without Fir'aun, there is no Musa. And so on and so forth. So light is discernible only because it exists in degrees. Without the existence of darkness, light remains imperceptible and so on. So in that sense, it is like the human eye, it's a yardstick. Now a yardstick is just something we use to measure distance. And what Nursi is saying is, like darkness, the eye, the human eye, has no concrete material existence. Darkness has no existence. Darkness is the absence of light. In and of itself, darkness doesn't exist. So, why is the human eye needed? And Nursi says that the human eye is needed because God's attributes and names, such as knowledge, power, mercy, compassion, and wisdom, these are all-encompassing. They're limitless. And so what we have to do, we have to impose on them an imaginary limit. Like that imaginary line of darkness that we use in order for light to become known. Like that imaginary blue spot, which we put there in order for red to be known. And this imaginary limit is placed on divine attributes of perfection by the human eye.
So,
Not this eye, but the eye, the ana. The ana places on the attributes of perfection an imaginary limit. Now, how does the eye do this? Nursi says it's very simple. It imagines that it is the owner of itself. The eye places an imaginary limit on God's limitless attributes by placing or by imagining that it owns itself. In other words, it claims ownership over all of the attributes of perfection that it experiences in itself. So, how does this work? The human ana looks at the power, the beauty, the wisdom, the compassion, the knowledge within its own beings, and it claims ownership. And that ownership appears to be very real. But it's an illusion. Its function is there only to indicate the true owner. And this is how it happens, Nursi says. For example, with its imagined ownership over what it has, the eye may understand the real ownership of the creator over contingent creation, saying, just as I am the owner of this house, so too is the creator the owner of this creation. This is how we get to understand God's attributes, by first imagining that our attributes belong to us. So, I build my house. The creation must have a builder. God builds the creation, I build my house. We compare. All the time under this illusion that our attributes are really our own. So, similarly, through his own knowledge, man may understand the knowledge of God. Man says, okay, I know lots and lots of things, but God knows everything. This is a very childlike way of understanding, but this is what we do, unconsciously. I use wisdom to solve this problem. God must use huge amounts of wisdom in the creation of the universe. We make a comparison. I know lots of things, God knows everything. But actually, our knowledge is not ours. These attributes are not ours. They're only put there so that we can use them as a unit of measurement. Like the kilo in the greengrocer's shop. Like the imaginary line of measurement. So God places in us samples of his own names so that we can get to know those names. But once we get to know those names, we have to attribute them to him, not to ourselves. Yeah.
So I guess in a way it's a means by which we can fathom the extent, but also the extent of which what we don't know.
Yes.
At the same time.
Yeah, at the same time. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
It's commonly thought that darkness is the absence of light.
Yes.
But then there is a verse in the Quran where Allah says that he's the originator of darkness.
Yes.
So
Originator, but not creator.
But to originate it, doesn't that mean to, like he would say, he said he's the Badi'as Samawati wal Ard.
Yes.
Does that not mean to have created it?
Why doesn't he use Badi'ul Zulumat? He uses Ja'ala, yes, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
He places the darkness, but he doesn't use Khalaqa or the other one? Badi. He doesn't use Bada'a or Khalaqa. He uses Ja'ala, I think. Because it's not created. So, we look at our own creative powers and we extrapolate from them and we conclude that whoever is responsible for the creation of the universe must possess similar powers, but on a truly cosmic scale. So at this initial stage of our spiritual journey, we share the attributes. You know, I'm pretty clever, but God must be really, really clever. We're sharing the knowledge, the attribute of knowledge. I'm very powerful, I can lift, 200 kilos. God, his power is endless. We're sharing. We're actually making shirk. Are we not? But it's necessary. No, shirk jali. But it's necessary at this stage. It's necessary to say, I am this, God is this. I am this much powerful, God is infinitely powerful. I am this much wise, God is infinitely wise. So, at this initial stage of our spiritual journey, we share the attributes between ourselves and God. I have power, God therefore must have lots of power. And this applies to all of the divine names and attributes. So according to Nursi, the eye is nothing but a mirror-like unit of measurement. It's a tool through which we are able to discover the Creator. It has no meaning in itself. It exists only to reveal the existence and meaning of something absolute. Just as darkness is used to indicate light. Just as the word kilo, which has no existence in itself, is there to indicate measure. Ana is simply a tool. Any questions so far?
I was just going to say, it's a paradox in the sense that you need that ana to actually arrive at unlessness.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
So it's very dangerous for man to assume that ana, good, whatever the word is,
Yes.
and then not know his limits. At what point does he have, shall I say, awakening?
Yes.
That,
Yes.
this was the yardstick.
Yes.
It wasn't itself anything, it was just
Yeah.
existential. It was a measure for me to be able to measure how
Yeah.
much, like in Urdu, in my language, the more I know, the more I realize that I didn't know anything.
Yes. Yeah.
So he says knowledge is actually acknowledgement of your lack of knowledge.
And your lack of knowledge. But in order to know your lack of knowledge, you have to have the illusion that you have knowledge.
Yeah, you have to, in the first place,
Yes.
when you actually really go on a journey, on a quest to acquire knowledge, you realize that your knowledge is just
Yes.
no knowledge.
Yes.
There's so
Absolutely.
much. Yeah.
Or it's given to you.
It's
Or
given,
reflected upon
yeah.
you. Yeah.
In Risale also, Raison mentioned there are two faces of the ana.
That's what I'm coming to
Yeah,
now.
okay.
Yes. So, as the brother is mentioning now, there are two faces to ana. Ana is a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Ana can be a very dangerous tool, because although it's designed to lead human beings towards God, if we misunderstand ana, it takes us in the other direction. And I think the whole of human history has been about reading and misreading ana. So if we use ana to journey towards God, at some stage, either through our own reasoning or through the grace of revelation, we will realize that the only one who is absolute in every sense of the word is the creator and nurturer of the cosmos, Rabbul Alameen. So we have this illusory ownership of our attributes of perfection. That illusory ownership is only there so that we can realize the true owner. What do we do once we've realized the true owner? We try to get rid of our ownership. Submit our names to Allah. Taslim. Make taslim of our names. That is, being Muslim means giving back the names that you've stolen from Allah. That's all. Not stolen. You've been given the names, but you don't want to give them back.
They overstay their welcome.
Yes.
Perhaps,
Yes. This is why, if you die as an unbeliever, death is so painful and difficult. Because the names haven't been given back. You've held on to this ownership all of your life. Yes, and the angels have to force it out of you.
Right.
Which is why, it talks about it's very difficult for an unbeliever to die, because it's like pulling out something which is covered in,
layers and layers of cotton.
Yes. Whereas for a believer, it's like taking a hair off I think a glass of milk or something. It's very easy. Because the believer has given back the names. The believer hasn't held on to these names. It's not holding on. So, if man uses his ana to journey towards God, he will realize that the only one who is absolute, in every sense of the word, is the creator and nurturer of the cosmos. In other words, those attributes of perfection, which Anna was happy to share conceptually between himself and God, have now to be surrendered. So the samples that we have to give them back, conceptually, metaphorically give them back. Because God is absolutely knowledgeable. You don't have any knowledge. God is absolutely wise. You don't have any wisdom. If you have wisdom and knowledge, they are reflections of His wisdom and knowledge. But where does this leave human attributes. Nursi argues that man's power is imaginary. The ownership that he appears to exercise over his attributes is an illusion. It's there only to reveal the very absolute nature of God's attributes. And realizing this truth is the key to real worship. That is to say, the I realizes that it serves one other than itself. This is the meaning of true worship. When Anna realizes that it serves one other than itself, its essence has only an indicative meaning. That is, it understands that it carries the meaning of another. Its existence is dependent. That is, it believes that its existence is due only to the existence of another, and that the continuance of its existence is due solely to the creativity of that other, i.e. God. Its ownership is illusory. That is, it knows that with the permission of its owner, it has an apparent and temporary ownership. This is the key to belief. The key to salvation, actually. Now, the issue of ownership is very important, because it's this metaphorical surrender of our temporary and illusory ownership which underpins the notion of Islam, or submission.
Right.
Islam is submission. It doesn't just mean obeying laws. That's a secondary thing.
Right.
The most important surrender, or Islam, is giving up the names, giving them back. Giving back the Rolex, you know, that has been entrusted. Because it's only by giving up our claims to ownership of the attributes that we can understand this notion of purification of the self. You know, the Sufis talk about purification of the self. Nursi, who is not a Sufi, by the way, also talks about purification of the self, but he means giving up these attributes, attributing them to the correct owner.
Is that tazkiyat al-nafs?
Yes, yes. And we can only make this true surrender if we realize what Ana really is. A shadowy, insubstantial mechanism which exists solely to indicate the Creator. Once man truly accepts this, the I, the Ana, will abandon its temporary and imaginary ownership and will admit that all attributes belong only to God. That is when Ana can say, La ilaha illallah. Lahul asmaul husna. To him belong all the beautiful attributes. It will realize that what it appears to own is only there in the form of a loan. It's only been lent temporarily. And so, what does it mean by giving back the attributes? Giving back means using them as he wants you to use them. So, displaying the attributes as God wants you to display. So you're compassionate, God tells you to be compassionate. He tells you how to be compassionate. He tells you to whom you should be compassionate. So you're still using the attribute of compassion, but you're not using it as though you are the owner. You're using it in His name. Bismi Rahman, in this particular case. So to give back the attributes means to use them in a manner dictated by the one who gave them to you in the first place. So for example, to submit your knowledge, to submit one's imaginary knowledge, means to nurture knowledge for the sake of God. And to use it in accordance with God's will. It also means to attribute it to Him at all times, under all circumstances, not to appropriate it for oneself. not to imagine that we have any real or perceived power of disposal over it. It's not ours to do with as we wish. Every divine attribute is that Rolex which we've entrusted to Haqqan there. Submission, Islam, involves the conscious attribution of all of the attributes of perfection to God. And if we do that, we turn ourselves into a conscious mirror through which God's attributes can be reflected for others to see. We become an example for others so that other people can see the reflection of God in us. Is it al-mu'min mirat al-mu'min? Is it? Yes?
Yeah.
The mu'min is the mirror of the mu'min. We look at each other, we see God. We see God's attributes in each other. Because we see compassion used properly. We see wisdom used properly. We see knowledge used properly. What does it mean to use compassion properly? I was on a train recently and there was this child who was crying and crying and crying, and his mother was getting more and more annoyed and angry because the people around her were, looking. And so she took chocolate out of her bag and gave it to the little boy. And more chocolate, every time he cried she gave him some chocolate. This isn't compassion. You're not giving him compassion, you're giving him diabetes, So compassion is using compassion, Bismillah, in God's name, how God tells us to use it. And this surrendered ana forms the basis of what Sayyid Nursi calls the line of prophethood, which is the current of thought based on a reading of the cosmic narrative which is mediated through acceptance of God, acceptance of divine sovereignty. What's the alternative? The alternative, as Nursi points out, is for the I, for the ana, to hold on to the ownership of the names and to deny that there is a creator who has a greater claim on those names. So I said ana is dangerous or can be dangerous. Ana is a double-edged sword. If ana is not treated properly, it will take the attributes it finds and it will nurture them and say, these are mine, my knowledge. I am a professor. I am a doctor. I am a surgeon because I had the knowledge. Power, knowledge, wisdom, all of these things.
Excuse me, just said.
What's the alternative? The alternative, Nursi says the alternative is for the I within man, to hold on to this illusory ownership and to deny that there is a creator. So the example would be, for example, I gave my Rolex to Haqqan. I go back, or someone says to him, whose Rolex is this? He says, it's mine. It's not, it's mine, but he's, I've gone away on holiday, I've given him my Rolex. Someone comes to his house, whose Rolex is he? He says, it's mine. And if he says it enough, he's going to believe it. So maybe I don't come back from my trip for months and months. When I come back, he's actually starting to forget that I actually gave him, He's telling himself that it's his now. And even if I'm trying to prove, it's mine, I don't have any proof.
But doesn't possession constitute half of ownership?
We wish. We wish. In English law, they say possession is 9/10 of the law. When then we could say, I own all of these attributes, I'm never going to give them back. And actually, human beings, we don't give them back. We don't give them back. We want to hang on to everything. Have you heard of Bahlul? Bahlul or Bahlul? He's a famous, I think in Sufi narratives you find him. He was what they call a fool of God.
Oh, yes.
He was a Majnoon. And one of the Abbasid caliphs built a mosque. I can't remember which one, maybe Amin Mamun, one of the caliphs. And it said on, the Masjid of Amin, written on there. So Bahlul in the middle of the night goes out and he takes the word Amin off. And then the next day, of course, all hell breaks loose. The Caliph is saying, this is my masjid, I built this. Bahlul says, it's you? Is that masjid? You did this? Your money? Your power? You are the Khalifa, you know? You are the representative of God. Is it yours? So what happens is, the alternative is we hold on to this illusory ownership. We deny that there is a creator with a claim on that ownership. And this happens when I refuses or fails to recognize its true function and sees itself solely in the light of its surface meaning. So if the I believes that it owns itself, it cannot act consciously as a mirror of God. And it fails the trust. The amana, it fails it. Now, for Nursi, and I think for us, it's not difficult to understand why Anna would choose the path of self-assertion rather than self-submission. Why would Anna choose to submit to God rather than to keep the names for itself? Now, if we're created in God's image, if we have these little samples of the divine names, is it surprising that we should want to keep them?
No.
No. Is it surprising that Hakan should want to keep that Rolex? No, it's beautiful. Who doesn't want to keep their own attributes? When I go back to Durham tomorrow, it's going to be very difficult for me to say, yeah, I gave this seminar, but really it wasn't me. It wasn't my knowledge, it wasn't my wisdom. It's very hard. Because these names are beautiful names. They are Asmaul Husna. So when we have, my friend Enes here, looks in the mirror and sees this very handsome chap, handsome reflection. He wants to own it. It's him. And I only picked you because of your surname. His surname is Güzel, and Güzel means beautiful. So he's Enes beautiful. But he's beautiful by name, and no, you are also very beautiful. Yes. But it's difficult to give these names back. It's not easy to make taslim of the names. It's not easy. So, if we're created in God's image with all of these samples of perfections in us, it's not surprising that we would want to claim these attributes as our own. So, when we are so used to power and wisdom, beauty and such, to be told that they belong to someone else is, it's very upsetting. It's actually mind-blowing. And it's often followed by denial and rebellion. You don't want to submit, so you deny. He doesn't want to give me back the Rolex. He says, no one gave me this, it's my Rolex. I've always had it. And so, the longer that the I claims ownership, the more difficult it becomes to submit. And eventually what happens? The I starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger. It starts to swell. It has this imaginary ownership. It has this imaginary control. This imaginary power. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it becomes all self. All Anna. And that's where we get the word selfish. Because it's all about me. Because then we're not using the Anna as a measure to understand God. We use it as a measure to measure all other things against ourselves. And we then become the center of the universe. Anna becomes the center of the universe. And it's this rebellious Anna which Nursi calls the line of philosophy. We saw the line of prophethood. He calls this rebellious line the line of philosophy. And he calls it the line of philosophy because it's the result of our reading the cosmic book through the prism of our own self, without reference to God. Just in the same way that a certain number of philosophers claimed that reason was more important than revelation.
Sorry, could you just read that? Just repeat that.
Nursi divides the ana, which is used properly, and the ana which is not used properly, into two lines. The first is the line of prophethood, because when ana is used properly, it's used as the prophets use their own ana. So he calls that the line of prophethood. And this is opposed to the line of philosophy. And for that we have to understand that in Muslim scholarship there is a tension between reason and revelation.
So used inappropriately?
Yes. He calls it the line of philosophy. It's just a name he uses to call this line.
Okay.
Don't think too much about the discipline of philosophy.
This is something clear.
But it's not completely unrelated. So the alternative then is for ana to imagine that it owns its own attributes. And it gets bigger and bigger and it becomes more egoistic. This is when we can use terms like egoistic and selfish.
Right.
It becomes egoistic, it becomes selfish. I become the center of the whole universe. And in order to keep this ownership, in order to keep all the names, what we do, we start to divide God's attributes between ourselves and other beings. So, for example, instead of attributing power to God, we attribute it to nature or to causes. We divide up God's attributes. If we don't attribute them to God, you've got this absolute perfection here, and you have to divide it up between the creation. So if you don't attribute it to God, you've got to attribute it to something. What do you attribute it to? If you're talking about Dawkins, they attribute the wisdom, the power, the knowledge, the harmony, all of these things that exist in creation, they attribute it to nature, Mother Nature, causes. So this is, we make tashriq, shirk. We make everything a sharik of Allah by dividing up His attributes. And Nursi, he explains this very well, justifying the ana. He says it's just like a man who steals money from the public treasury. He can only justify his actions by agreeing to take a pound or two for each of his friends that is present. So the man who says, I own myself, must believe and say, everything owns itself. For example, when I'm sitting at home, right, and we have guests, and there's a big box of chocolates there. I want chocolate so badly that first I offer it to my guest, please have a chocolate. They say no. I said, no, have one, please have a chocolate. He has a chocolate. My wife keeps telling me I shouldn't eat chocolate, it's bad for my blood sugar. I want chocolate, so I make sure everyone has chocolate.
It's like a door opener for your own.
Yeah, it opens the door, then I can,
yeah.
So if I want to worship myself, I have to agree that everything worships itself. Yeah? If I want people to bow down to me, I have to bow down to them as well. So I have to divide all of God's names and attributes. Just like Nursi here explaining, you know, the guy who steals money from the public treasury can only justify the action if everyone else actually steals as well. So I want to say I own my attributes. I have to say that the world, nature, owns its own attributes. To justify ownership for myself, I have to give ownership to everything else. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And of course, in this lies the way of shirk. The attribution to God of partners. And of course, this is why the heavens and the earth said we don't want the trust. We don't want the amana. So, this is Nursi's understanding of ana, and basically it provides us with a kind of spiritual psychology which hasn't been explored,
No.
which needs to be explored, and maybe our psychology students can explore Nursi's spiritual psychology. Are you doing a